Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Trump asks Congress for a $1 billion arms transfer to Israel. So the Trump administration has asked congressional leaders to approve a new $1 billion weapons transfer to Israel that will be funded by U.S. military aid. And this was first reported by the Wall Street Journal on Monday. So this deal includes 4,700 1,000-pound bombs worth more than $700 million and $300 million worth of armored bulldozers, which the Israeli military uses to demolish homes and infrastructure in Gaza and the West Bank. So heavy bombs and bulldozers to destroy Palestinian homes and infrastructure. The request for the new arms transfer comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington and set to meet with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday. He's expected to push for U.S. support for Israel to restart its genocidal war in Gaza instead of fully implementing the ceasefire deal. And even as things stand now, continued U.S. military aid to Israel means that you are supporting the raids in the West Bank, the occupation of southern Lebanon, the occupation of southern Syria, lots of ongoing Israeli military operations that the U.S. is supporting by continuing to provide military aid. And this report said that Netanyahu is also expecting Trump to push ahead with a massive $8 billion deal that President Biden notified congressional leaders about in early January. The report said that some Democrats in Congress put a hold on the massive sale and that the Trump administration is now pushing congressional leaders to unblock it. The $8 billion deal includes munitions for fighter jets and attack helicopters, as well as artillery shells. Just a massive deal. And again, I'm sure this is going to be funded by U.S. military aid as well. The Trump administration also recently released a hold on a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs for Israel. So lots of weapons being shipped to Israel under the new Biden administration. Israeli officials suggested that the increase in military aid was part of a deal to get Netanyahu to agree to this Gaza ceasefire deal. And we know that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, at least publicly, he's saying that he wants a full implementation of the ceasefire deal, but it's very fragile, the ceasefire, and Netanyahu clearly wants to not implement the second phase. And I mean, that report that I went over yesterday said that Israeli officials expect that if they restart military operations in Gaza, they'll be there doing it for at least a year. So another year of genocide, of slaughter of women and children in Gaza is possible. And that's what these bombs, these bulldozers is going to support. All right, so the next one here, Gaza's media office says that Israel killed nearly 62,000 Palestinians. So Gaza's media office said on Monday that the number of Palestinians killed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023 has reached 61,709, a figure that factors in people missing and presumed dead under the rubble or in areas where rescuers are still unable to access. So Salama Maroof, the head of the media office, told reporters that 76% of the bodies of Palestinians killed by Israeli forces have been recovered and arrived at hospitals, and at least 14,222 are missing. So Maroof said among the dead are 17,881 children. 17,881 children, just a huge number, including 214 newborn infants. And again, well, not again, I didn't say it, but this is people just killed by Israeli military action, directly by bombs and bullets. This does not account for the people that have died under the siege, of disease, of starvation, of malnutrition, all the babies that have died, all the newborn baby, born prematurely because of the medical conditions of their mother caused by the siege and dying or the ones dying of the cold, dying of exposure. I mean, so many babies have died through things like that. And this is just the violent deaths that they're talking about here. He also said 1,155 medical workers were killed, 205 journalists, and 194 civil defense workers. And so I mentioned in the story that, factoring in the indirect deaths, I think we easily get into the hundreds of thousands. So hundreds of thousands, in reality, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. Excuse me, sorry, I'm still getting over this cold. And Gaza's health ministry continues to count the number of bodies being discovered and said on Monday that 20 were brought to hospitals in the previous 24-hour period. And they said out of those 20 bodies, 18 were dug out of the rubble, recovered from the rubble. One was died of previously sustained wounds, and the other was killed by Israeli forces because even though there's a ceasefire, Palestinians continue to be killed in Gaza. All right, so the next one here. Israelis overwhelmingly support Trump's plan to clean out Gaza. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a new poll conducted in Israel found widespread support for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza as proposed by President Donald Trump. A poll from the Jewish People Policy Institute Israel Index released on Monday found that 80% of Jewish Israelis support Trump's proposal to clean out the Gaza Strip of Palestinians. Last month, Trump said, quote, "You're talking about 1.5 million people, and we just clean out the whole thing. It's literally a demolition site. Almost everything is demolished, and people are dying there. So I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing at a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change," end quote. And I know we're seeing Palestinians and aid groups calling for Israel to allow in construction material so they can build temporary housing inside Gaza because people need shelters. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich quickly endorsed this proposal and said that he would work to implement it. So the Israeli Jewish population is divided on whether the plan is practical. Among Jewish Israelis, a narrow majority, 52%, believe that Trump's plan is practical and can actually happen and should be pursued. The other 30% view the ethnic cleansing as not practical but desirable. Just over 1 in 10 Israeli Jews viewed Trump's proposal as a distraction. Only 3% replied that the ethnic cleansing of Gaza is immoral. So very strong support for this idea. The press release from the Jewish People Policy Institute noted the results are a dramatic shift for Israeli Jews who once opposed the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The statement says, quote, "Shifting views on population transfer overall, the idea of significantly relocating Gaza's Palestinian population, once considered illegitimate by many Israelis, now enjoys broad support among Jewish Israelis. When there is opposition, it is typically based on a practicality rather than a principle," end quote. Basically, when they're saying there's opposition, it's people who are saying, well, it's not really a realistic option. And again, you see all this resistance from the Arabs, from the Arab states, that it does make it seem like it's not very likely, but it's something Trump keeps talking about. All right, so the next one here, Trump is considering sending 24,000 rifles to Israel. So this is another one from Kyle. President Donald Trump is mulling releasing an arms shipment of 24,000 rifles for the Israeli police. The Joe Biden administration withheld the transfer over concerns they would be used by violent Israeli settlers in the West Bank. A U.S. official said on Friday that the State Department was considered approving the $34 million sale of rifles to Israel, according to the New York Times. And I'm sure this is another sale that the U.S. is going to be paying for. The State Department stated that the weapons would be used by the Israeli National Police. Antony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, initially withheld the shipment to Israel over concerns that the rifles would end up in the hands of violent Israeli settlers. And the settler violence has really stepped up, obviously, since October 7th. And, this is something I know Ben-Gvir, I guess he's not the Minister of National Security anymore, but he was, handing out rifles to Israeli settlers. And these are people that are terrorizing Palestinians in the West Bank because they want to steal their land and steal their homes. I mean, it's as simple as that. And no, it's nobody can really argue that. But so there is a chance of these rifles going to those people. All right, so the next one here, Trump wants Ukraine rare earth minerals for military aid. President Trump said Monday that he's looking to reach an agreement with Ukraine that will guarantee U.S. access to rare earth minerals in the country in exchange for continued U.S. military aid. So this does not sound very good. He told reporters, quote, "We're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist," end quote. The president suggested that Ukraine would agree to the proposal, or that, maybe even they've already talked about it. He said, quote, "I want to have security of rare earth. We're putting in hundreds of billions of dollars. They have great rare earth, and I want security of the rare earth, and they're willing to do it," end quote. And I know Zelensky's totally opened everything up to, Western American companies to come in to Ukraine after the war. And of course, during the war, there's other things happening as well. But Trump also said that European countries should be paying more for military aid to Ukraine to get on an equal level of spending with the U.S. So comments making it sound like the U.S. military aid to Ukraine is going to continue for some time. And when we're talking about rare earth minerals, this is something that Senator Lindsey Graham has brought up quite a few times when it comes to Ukraine. In November, he told Fox News host Sean Hannity, and again, this is Lindsey Graham, quote, "This war is about money. People don't talk much about it, but the richest country in all of Europe for rare earth minerals is Ukraine. $2 to $7 trillion worth of minerals that are rare earth minerals, very relevant to the 21st century. Ukraine's ready to do a deal with us, not the Russians, so it's in our interest to make sure that Russia doesn't take over the place," end quote. Graham added that he expected Trump to make a deal with Ukraine related to the rare earth minerals. And something that just popped into my head was back in 2019 when Trump said he wanted to withdraw from Syria, and then he decided to stay to secure the oil. One of the people who convinced him to do that was Lindsey Graham. He went into the Oval Office with a map saying, "Look at all these oil fields. Iran's going to take them over if we leave. You got to stay for the oil." And Trump said, okay. So it sounds like Trump might be speaking with Lindsey Graham about this Ukraine situation. So the next one here, U.S. weapon shipments to Ukraine resume after brief pause. So U.S. weapon shipments to Ukraine were briefly paused by the Trump administration, but resumed over the weekend. This was reported by Reuters on Monday, citing people briefed on the matter. It was unclear if the Trump administration's pause on foreign aid included weapon shipments to Ukraine. So if you remember how things went down, they ordered the pause on foreign aid. The Pentagon said that it wouldn't affect military aid. Zelensky said military aid hasn't been paused. But according to this report, there was a pause on all assistance to Ukraine, but that has now been rescinded by the White House, and the weapon shipments continue. So the Trump administration has not approved any new weapons packages for Ukraine, but you remember Biden's final months in power, he approved billions and billions of dollars of weapon shipments. And some of those are going to take years. I mean, it's going to take months and years for these weapons to go over there unless Trump stops them. One of the main ways that the U.S. has been arming Ukraine is through what they call the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's a program that lets the Pentagon purchase weapons for Ukraine. So that involves a contracting period. And then I know in some cases they actually have to manufacture the weapons. In other deals, the weapons are already made and they kind of rush it. But in other cases, they still have to be manufactured, and that takes years and years to happen. So there's a whole bunch of weapon shipments lined up to go out the door to Ukraine, and they're going. The weapons are being shipped according to this report, and so according to the Reuters report, there are factions of the Trump administration at odds over how much support the U.S. should continue to give Ukraine. The administration has said that its official policy is to end the war, but it remains unclear how that's going to happen. President Trump has said there's been talks between the U.S. and Russia, but it's unclear at what level these discussions are happening. the Kremlin said on Monday again that there's been no effort by the U.S. to set up a Trump-Putin meeting or phone call or anything. I mean, that's something I think he should have done day one. But he still hasn't spoken with Putin, and the war continues. I mean, I haven't really been covering the military aspect, but the Russians are making gains in eastern Ukraine, just nonstop. Ukraine's firing all these drones into Russia, and Russia is, bombing Ukrainian cities. I mean, it's everything. It's just so much death and destruction happening over there still. That's why I mentioned in that viewpoint I wrote yesterday, just make the deal now, make the ceasefire right now, because there's no magic button the U.S. can press to give Ukraine more leverage over Russia. All right, so the next one here, 20 killed in car bombing in Syria's Manbij. So this is from Jason Ditz. In the single deadliest bombing since the Syrian regime change in December, at least 20 people were killed and over a dozen others wounded in a car bombing. Most of the dead and wounded were women, and the target was agricultural workers on the outskirts of Manbij. This is the city in northern Syria. So this area has been contested between the Kurdish SDF and the Turkish-backed SNA for weeks, and it fell to the SNA a little over a month ago. And this marks at least the 7th car bombing in and around Manbij in that time. Exactly who is behind these bombings, including today's, is not at all apparent. The SDF was quick to denounce the latest bombing and to imply that mercenary factions affiliated with Turkey were behind the chaos. So we don't know. Nobody's taking credit for it. Jason says, so it's possible that Turkish factions were responsible, but again, we don't know. And some of the previous car bombings killed SNA fighters, so killed the Turkish-backed fighters. So it's not definitive at all if one or the other did it, or if some third party did this car bombing. It's possible, I guess, that it's ISIS, but ISIS isn't really in this area, and ISIS also usually always takes credit like right away, but maybe it'll become more clear tomorrow. So just a horrific bombing. Again, 20 people killed, mostly women, looks like all civilians. Just horrific. All right, so the next one here, 15 killed by sectarian massacre in Syrian Alawite village. This is another one from Jason. So Syria's ruling Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, has repeatedly promised to be an inclusive Syria that respects all of its communities. That doesn't appear to be working out so well for the nation's Alawite minority, though, which is coming under growing attack. Over the weekend, gunmen from an unidentified Sunni group attacked the village of Arza al-Daba. They reportedly went door to door and shot Alawites who answered the knock. At least 15 people are reported to have been killed. So going door to door, knocking on the door, anybody who answers, you kill. Details are still emerging, but this is hardly the first time since the regime change in December that Alawites have come under direct attack. The HTS directly participated in past raids, though in this incident it doesn't appear that they were directly present, or at least officially present. A lot of these Sunni groups fall under HTS. So the Alawites make up about 10% of Syria's population, and Assad was an Alawite. So there's this kind of, they're framing a lot of these crackdowns as crackdowns on former members of the Syrian military. But again, they're just going into these towns and just killing anyone who's an Alawite who's there. So just really horrific massacres going on in Syria. All right, so the next one here, Turkey plans to establish military bases in Syria. This article is from The Cradle. The Turkish army is planning to establish 2 new military bases in Syria that it will use to train the new armed forces in the country. Unnamed Arab sources were cited as saying by the Turkey newspaper on February 3rd. The report says that Turkey will train the country's army in 2 military bases it will establish in Syria. Turkey and Syria will sign a joint defense agreement. According to the agreement, which is expected to be signed soon, Ankara will help Syria if Damascus faces a sudden threat. So this is something here. I mean, we knew that Turkey backed this offensive. It is just, again, you have HTS, which is a group that's still designated by the U.S. as a terrorist organization, has their roots in Al-Qaeda, and Turkey, a NATO ally, helps them take over Syria with support from the U.S. And now, Turkey's just going to quickly form an alliance with them, open military bases. And this is part of Erdogan's thing. He wants to expand. And, he's probably very happy with himself that this regime change has gone through. Never mind all the massacres and things like that. All right, so the next one here. Sorry, I'm still got this cold. The next one here, Trump pauses tariffs on Mexico and Canada. So on Monday, President Trump said he was pausing recently announced tariffs on Mexico and Canada for 1 month after speaking with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So both tariffs are paused for a month while they do these negotiations, which is good. It's good that it looks like they're going to work something out. It looks like Trump was doing a little art of the deal here with his tariffs threats. So Trump wrote on Truth Social after speaking with Mexico's president, quote, "It was a very friendly conversation wherein she agreed to immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border separating Mexico and the United States," end quote. He said the Mexican troops would be deployed to the border to stop the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants into the U.S. Trump said the tariffs would be paused for 1 month while the U.S. and Mexico negotiate some sort of deal related to the border. And Mexico's president also announced the pause on the tariffs and said that she, quote, "had a good conversation with President Trump with great respect for our relationship and sovereignty. We reached a series of agreements," end quote. One thing, she said that the U.S. committed to working to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons into Mexico. So that's one thing that's smuggled into Mexico is guns and other types of weapons. And then later in the day, Trump spoke with Trudeau, and the Canadian leader announced a border plan to stop the flow of fentanyl. Trudeau said, quote, "I just had a good call with President Trump. Canada is implementing our $1.3 billion border plan, reinforcing the border with new choppers, technology, and personnel, enhanced coordination with our American partners, and increased resources to stop the flow of fentanyl," end quote. So Trump wrote on Truth Social that Canada agreed to ensure that there's a secure northern border and to end the scourge of fentanyl coming in. So, as I said yesterday, reducing the flow, stopping the flow of fentanyl is basically impossible because it's so small. It could be smuggled in various different ways. I know the statistics, it's mostly Americans who go into Mexico and then bring it back. I know that's the case with fentanyl. I'm not sure about other drugs, but because it's something easy, you could just hide very easily. But it's good that the tariffs are not, looks like at least they're not going to happen for now, because those were pretty heavy tariffs that he ordered. All right, so the last story here, USAID to merge with state and face cuts. So the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, will be merged into the State Department and will face significant cuts. And this was reported by CBS News. So President Trump's pause on foreign aid has upended USAID. I know I was calling it USAID yesterday, but I think I decided I'm going to stick with calling it USAID because it kind of sounds more nefarious than USAID. USAID sounds nice. USAID sounds a little more evil, and it is a nefarious organization. So USAID serves as a soft power arm of the U.S. government and its intelligence agencies to meddle in the affairs of countries around the world, including by funding opposition groups to foment dissent. USAID has been targeted by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, and Musk has suggested that President Trump wants a complete shutdown of the agency. However, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that many of the functions of USAID will continue under the State Department, though he stressed the need for reform. Speaking to reporters in El Salvador, Rubio said that he was now the acting director of USAID. He said, quote, "My frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. There are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy," end quote. So he's saying lots of functions of USAID are going to continue under the State Department. You have Musk saying that they're going to shut it down. that it's an evil organization that needs to be totally destroyed, which that would be great. But I have a feeling what Rubio's saying is going to be the reality here, that it's going to be kind of brought under his control, and I'm sure it's going to continue some of its activities. But we'll see. Either way, I think all this is great, what's happening, all this attention on USAID, because a lot of people don't understand how this stuff works. And like not that long ago, I mean, it wasn't many people talking about the USAID, how it destabilizes other countries. And people are also talking about the National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the US, that does very similar things. And now it's just like everybody seems to be talking about what they do in other countries and the things that they fund. So I think it's great for this stuff to be exposed, because a lot of times, regular people that don't really pay attention to this stuff might hear some of these things about USAID, about them funding, protests in Ukraine before the Maidan and things like that, and just chalk it up to conspiracy theories or whatever. But this stuff is very real, and it really does impact other countries. I mean, look at Georgia. That's the whole reason behind their foreign agents law. That's the real positive that's coming out of this. And hopefully a lot of it gets gutted. That would be good. On Sunday night, President Trump said that USAID has been, quote, run by a bunch of radical lunatics and we're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision, end quote. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Ted Snyder. Did we just see Trump's Ukraine peace plan? One from Ron Paul. Audit USAID and then shut it down. And I totally agree with that. One from Casey Carlisle. What does national security have to do with soaring defense spending? One from Doug Bandow. Zelensky demands an American garrison. One from Daniel Blattman. There's no Auschwitz in Gaza, but it's still genocide. And that's from an Israeli Holocaust historian writing in Haaretz. So you really don't see headlines like that in the main U.S. American papers, but you see it in Israeli media. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting. All that stuff helps us. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok too. We're doing pretty well over on TikTok. It's basically just clips of this show. I got to start posting them in other places. I've been slacking on that. But anyway, that is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.